We have then concluded the overview of the biological control of the two-spotted spider mite on apples using the western predatory mite, and we'd now like to share with you some of our investigation concerning worm farming with the California redworm. The following is a brief investigation conducted in our biological control rearing facilities concerning worm farming with the California redworm and effects of the products derived from worm farming in relation to general plant growth when using organic farming methods. On the left-hand side of the slide, you are seeing examples of vermicompost, solid worm humus, and mixes of vermicompost and/or worm humus with common soil. On the right-hand side of the slide, you see an example of liquid humus prepared 1 liter of liquid humus in 200 liters of water, and this is what we use to water 100% of the plants in the investigation. The products of worm farming enabled us to grow plants of superior quality using 100% organic growing methods. We conducted our investigation in an abandoned feed trough, which demonstrates that you don't need to employ complicated infrastructure to enjoy the benefits of worm farming. The feed trough is 7 feet long, 2 feet wide, and with a depth of approximately 2.5 feet. The first step in the installation process was to place polyurethane plastic bags in the bottom of the trough, and these are to facilitate the capture of liquid humus after programmed watering of the worms. Semi-decomposed cattle manure is the principal food of the redworm and the substrate that we will be utilizing in our investigation. The second step in installation was to place a 6-inch layer of semi-decomposed cattle manure in the bottom of the trough, and we also added semi-decomposed apples and cow dung to the substrate. The apples provide additional vitamins and minerals in the diet of the worm, and the cow dung adds important enzymes which we will later recover in the excrement of the worms. The third step in the installation process was to incorporate the redworms into the substrate. The method we used to incorporate the worms was to simply extend organic material with redworms on top of the substrate and with care avoiding causing any physical harm to the worms. The redworm is photophobic, so when it's exposed to light, it immediately begins to penetrate the substrate and explore its new environment. We then added broccoli to the substrate because broccoli is a plant which has a high content of beneficial bacteria in its tissues, and we will later recover these beneficial bacteria in the worm's excrement. We initiated this project in the month of December, so here we have added oatmeal to the substrate, and the oats will provide the worms with additional carbohydrates, which will help the worms to compensate for the cold temperatures throughout the winter season. We also added lettuce to the substrate, which will provide additional minerals and important enzymes which will help to improve the overall quality of the worm's humus. The final additional element that we added to the substrate was plain sanitary paper. The paper is an excellent source of cellulose or carbon molecules, which is essential in the diet of the worm. After adding all of the additional elements to the substrate, we then covered the elements with semi-decomposed cattle manure and semi-decomposed apples. We included the additional elements to the substrate or in the diet of the worms because we wanted to investigate the effects of these elements on the overall quality of the worm's humus. However, we would like to clearly state that you may raise worms in semi-decomposed cow manure without adding additional organic material if you choose to do so. To complete the installation process, we watered the substrate until we reached a saturation level of approximately 82%. 72 hours after the initial watering, we were able to collect 1 liter of what we refer to as liquid bioactive organic fertilizer. This is not yet humus liquid, however the properties of the organic fertilizer are quite beneficial to plants. After the collection of either bioactive liquid organic fertilizer or humus liquid, we verify the pH levels of the liquid, and the range should be between 6.5 and 7.5. Under proper environmental conditions, the redworm completes its biological transition from egg to sexually mature adult after 90 days. The worm seen here is approximately 60 days old and has not yet reached sexual maturity. This is the same worm after 90 days, and the arrow is pointing to the worm's reproductive organs, which are now clearly visible. When the worm has reached sexual maturity and under proper environmental conditions, the worm will couple or mate every 7 days. The adult worms have both male and female reproductive organs, so after mating, each worm will separate and deposit an egg. Approximately 72 hours after mating or fertilization of the egg begins to detach from the reproductive organs of the worm. In this picture, you can see that the maturing egg has freely detached from the reproductive organs of the worm, and in the following images you will see how the worm deposits the egg into the substrate. This image demonstrates how the worm begins to slide through the center of the egg. In this image, you can see that the egg has advanced practically to the tip of the tail of the worm. And here is the egg finally deposited upon the surface of the substrate. The red worm does not lay its eggs upon the surface. This worm did because it was given special conditions making possible the documentation of this biological process. Under proper environmental conditions, the egg will incubate for a period of 14 to 18 days. Then the egg will open and 20 to 21 larvae will emerge from the egg. This is a larva of the red worm just after it's emerged from the egg. It's virtually transparent because it has not eaten yet. This is our same larva 30 minutes after it has emerged from the egg. It's begun to feed itself, and now you can clearly see the organic material in the intestine of the larva. The worm needs to conduct its biological processes in the substrate at least 6 months before we can consider the recollection of the worm excrement or humus. However, after 6 months, the humus of the worm will have transformed into an excellent natural organic fertilizer. After 11 months of investigation, we have accumulated a 2-inch solid layer of worm humus in our feeding trough. This then is a sample of the worm's humus after 11 months, and we are going to apply a simple criteria to qualify the quality of the humus. The first criteria is the color of the humus, and the color should be, and in this case is, a dark rich brown or almost black color emulating fertile organic soil. The second and final criteria we will apply will be the aroma of the humus. The humus should smell very similar to fertile organic soil. Any offensive odors indicate that the material has probably entered an anaerobic metabolic state, and it is quite probable that the material would contain phytotoxic materials which would be harmful to plants and potentially to humans. And of course, the material should be discarded and not used. Recently collected worm humus will have a moisture level between 70 and 82%. To process the humus, we break it into smaller pieces and wait for the moisture level to lower to approximately 50%. Once the moisture level of the collected humus has lowered to 50%, we pass it through a screen and sift it. The particles of the worm humus at a molecular level are based upon carbon molecules. Carbon is an excellent material which will filter out or neutralize an ample spectrum of toxins in the soil, such as heavy metals like arsenic, as well as the majority of harmful chemical residuals which may be found in the soil after applying insecticides and herbicides. 6 months after initiating the worm project, we began to investigate the solid products derived from worm farming, such as vermicompost, solid humus, and combinations of these solids mixed with common soil. This is a modular project combining worm farming, organic farming, and the biological control of the green apple aphid. In this project, we planted bell pepper plants in a standard wooden apple crate in a plastic bag using vermicompost instead of planting in soil. We infested the bell pepper plants with green apple aphids to investigate whether or not the products of worm farming would help to protect the plant from insect attacks and or diminish the harm to the plants caused by the insects. 100% of the irrigation applied to our infested plants was 1 liter of liquid humus mixed with 200 liters of water. Our investigation revealed that the properties of the products of worm farming did indeed reduce the harmful effects of the insects feeding upon the plants, as well as help the plants to recover after we biologically controlled the aphid populations on the plants. After forming our conclusion concerning the effects of the worm farming products on plants suffering from stress caused by insects, we then inoculated our plants with beneficial insects, first with a single pair of ladybird beetles. The lady beetle is perhaps the best natural biological control agent for the green apple aphid in nature, and here you can see larvae of the lady beetle in abundance. These are lady beetle larvae in metamorphosis, completing their transition from larvae to sexually mature adults. 20 days after inoculating the plants with a single pair of beetles, we had achieved the biological control of the green apple aphids. We reinfested our bell pepper plants with green apple aphids and inoculated the plants with a parasitic wasp called Aphidius colemani. The parasitic wasp selectively injects its eggs into the aphids. Immediately after being parasitized, the aphid stops feeding and virtually becomes a mummy. Meanwhile, the larva of the wasp feeds upon the corporal fluids of the host insect, eventually provoking death of the parasitized aphids.